when you look on your platform, you have a love and a compassion for animals.
Hmm.
Uh, would you say is that where your love and compassion for animals was born out of? Because I see like people like, for instance, like Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
He had this love and compassion for pigeons,
Yeah.
and that grew out of his being ostracized, feeling ostracized from the community, but
Yeah.
also finding a space to love something.
I think similar to Mike Tyson. So I was, what people don't know about me, been a great fighter. Like, I mean, I was a great street fighter because I had to fend for myself because people thought every light skinned individual, specifically young light skinned men, were weak
Yeah,
or pretty boys.
yeah,
So, like I told you earlier, I had a lot of ass whooping to do
yeah,
and had pretty much 1 or 2 L's in my column,
yeah,
in terms of losing fights. With that being said, even though I had to prove myself, I always been a husky sized dude, like a big dude.
yeah,
And in my experience, for me specifically, I have always wanted to defend the most vulnerable of people or animals. What are we talking? That kid that was being bullied by that big dude, I would
yeah,
defend them. Or we're talking dog fights happening in the hood. I see two vulnerable animals didn't want to fight each other, but they are forced to fight each other. I would step in the middle of a dog fight, a little 8-year-old Dominic or a young guy, step
yeah,
in and breaking that up. So I'm wired to want to step in when I see any form of oppression
yeah,
happening, specifically to protect. Because even though I was selling dope, I wasn't a violent drug dealer.
yeah,
I had to do what I had to do, to survive. But I still was a guy that shifted the ideology when it came to the crews I was a part of, or it came to the different people I was responsible for in a lot of different ways. Don't get me wrong, nothing was sweet,
yeah,
but I move very rational and very logical. So my love to protect the most vulnerable has always been there specifically, and I feel like the same thing with Mike Tyson. Even though he was an isolated introvert in many capacity and had a lot of traumas, the man just had a natural strength about him, and he knew you just kind of have it about you, similar to me, where he knew he needs to protect the most weak
yeah,
versus fight and protect the most strong.
yeah.
And I felt that way.
So with that being said, you know, at the time that you denounce all animal-based products
Yeah.
and decide, hey, if it's gonna cause harm, I'm cool on it.
Yeah.
Um, did you have the verbiage to say I'm going vegan at that time?
No, no, not at all. We didn't have the incredible resources that we have today.
Yeah,
We didn't have the incredible resources of the books that people, whether
social
they're
media, the
social
internet.
media, the documentaries. We didn't have the science and the data back
Okay,
then. We
gotcha.
just didn't. Because I stopped because of my ethical beliefs specifically. I have always had a love for animals specifically,
Okay.
but I stopped primarily for the animals,
Yeah.
then for myself, and then when the science and data finally caught up once I came home and all of that, because when I stopped eating meat, I was vegetarian in prison. Then I was vegetarian for 12, 13 years. Sorry, 10 years. And then went vegan, and I've been vegan now for 13 years. So collectively 23 years. But when I transitioned from vegetarianism to veganism, and you probably remember this, vegetarianism and veganism was interchangeable. It was
Yep.
one community, and I was screaming, "Leave animals alone," while being okay with dairy or eggs as part of my diet,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
knowing about that industry,
yeah,
because we didn't have the documentaries, we didn't have the resources and the data. I just didn't want to have anything to do with those animal being slaughtered. Not, and then to later learn, the dairy industry is one of the most exploited, most dangerous um, micro communities of the animal agriculture community that's
yeah,
doing a lot worse things to animals than the classic, bigger macro community of animal agriculture it is in
yeah,
itself. So, yeah, with that being said, I learned and experienced and learned even more once I came home. But when I stopped, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just stopped eating meat. I would trade my meat protein with my cellmates for their carbs. And they thought they looked at me like I was a crazy or weirdo. That's how
yeah,
my clothing company, that a lot of people know about crazies and weirdos, was birthed. But they're like, wait, Dom, you want to trade my car? You want me to give you my carbs for your meat? Like, you crazy, dude. Like, I was like, yeah. I didn't know what was gonna happen. I just didn't want to have nothing to do with meat.
Yeah.
And so here I was eating simple and complex carbs.
Like,
And I
give me
went,
that corn on the cob.
give me
Here, you can have
everything,
my chicken.
potatoes, pasta. Only thing that was plenty of we had plenty of in prison that we couldn't get rid of was oatmeal and bread.
Gotcha.
A lot of oatmeal and bread. But those moments where we made spaghetti, or those moments where we had certain type of potatoes, those moments where you had these additional vegetables, whether sweet potatoes or pumpkin or different yellows and more, or leafy greens. There's serving a very small proportion of leafy greens, but I would ask my cellmates for that and get them my chicken or buffalo meat that they were serving, and I would eat a lot of that. And I lost over 60 pounds
In prison.
in prison.
Gotcha. So, one of the things, so I didn't have the verbiage either.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not eating meat
Yeah.
because I'm unhealthy and I'm overweight and I got high blood pressure. I didn't know vegan. I knew very little about vegetarian. I knew of the word, but I just wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
And so it was purely a health journey for me. But one of the things I've taken an issue with in the vegan community is quite often what happens is it has created a lot of separation. And I do believe that we would be stronger if the vegetarian and vegan community came together, didn't judge each other, and we can push this further quicker. But when I first started this journey and people were calling me vegan, I was like, all right, cool. Yeah, I'm vegan.
Yeah.
And then what I noticed is that sometimes what I felt was the compassion wasn't extended to human beings. It was always extended to animals, but sometimes in the community at large, it wasn't always extended to human beings.
Yeah.
And so I think during the time when I first got back here, I moved back here from Japan. That was during the time where you saw a lot of black men getting shot in the streets. And so when I came back here, wrote the book, and I'm reaching out to different vegan influencers, predominantly white,
Sure.
I couldn't get any of them to say, hey, let's come together so we can start talking around these issues around how now we need to focus on extending that compassion to human beings.
Absolutely.
Have you sort of seen, that issue as well too in the
Absolutely.
community?
Yeah. When I was first introduced to this community, like I said, I knew nothing of this community, but I was approached
Yeah.
to be a part of these initiatives because my platform started growing. And this was before we had influencers, before there was an
Yeah.
influencer. I was like one of the early public figures where my platform organically took off because at that time, 10 years ago, when social media, specifically Instagram, was birthed, a friend of mine's who was a music producer, like, you need to get on this thing called social media. It's Instagram. I'm like, social what? Insta what?
Yeah.
He was like, you have a story to tell and just communicate this to the world. And this is the future. So following his advice, I created this platform and Instagram just to educate people about
Yeah.
the pros and cons and what I have experienced being a male of color, being a vegan. Because back then, the stereotypical male vegan was two types, both white men, either a middle-aged ultra endurance runner, like let's say a Rich Roll per se, or some younger Australian vegan guy, white, doing psychedelics in Bali and having orgies.
Yeah.
And I was neither. I was a man of color. I had size. I had a background. I was a straight shooter. I was not some hippie looking dude. And I told you how I felt. And
Yeah.
to this day, I tell you how I feel.
Yeah.
And so I was approached to be a part of these articles or these initiatives by these nonprofits for profits. And my first speaking engagement was at NYU, speaking about to a class of environmental majors and in studying humanities. But to your point, there was so many people was like for the animals, but didn't care about for the humans
Yeah.
at all, and they didn't have that connection to intersectionalism.
Yeah.
Like you can look to this day, it's still in many capacities like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Here we are talking on today where there's a huge conflict happening right now in the Middle East. But there's so many people tone deaf still posting about their love for animals,
Yep.
but not caring about these humans being slaughtered,
Right.
right? By in the numbers, in the thousands,
Yeah.
which is kind of heartbreaking because, yeah, I started off my journey from an ethical standpoint, but I have always cared about whether we talking animals that are non-human to human animals specifically. I don't want to have I don't want to see anything happening to people and humans just as much
Anything.
as anything,
Yeah.
even animals. So to this day, we still have that disconnect
Yeah.
where people still want to preach and talk about eating plant-based or being vegan with these micro communities that you mentioned. To like you said, there's no full sense of harmony where we all should be coming along just to push and educate what we can, because you have the purists over here that are like fruitarian and like juicing and leave the processed meats alone. Then you had the junk food vegans fighting with each other, and then you had the athletes fighting with each other, and you had the physicians and clinicians fighting with each other. It's definitely a lot of division in the vegan community. We have our problems for sure.
Yeah.
We do.